Welcome everyone. Today we will discuss what would have happened if the White Army had won the Russian Civil War. Now, as a bit of historical context, in the early 20th century, the Russian Empire was facing a dire situation. Economic hardships, political and social unrest, an inefficient Duma, no serious political reforms, and an incompetent Tsar plagued the Russian Empire. By the 1910s, some of these problems were almost solved and the Russian economy was growing. But then disaster struck. As we all know, in 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot by Bosnian Serb nationalists. Austria-Hungary sent an ultimatum to Serbia that was designed to be rejected. Serbia didn't like a few points, and Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia protected Serbia, so they declared war on Austria-Hungary. Germany joined in since war with Russia was kind of what the Kaiser wanted. France was allied with Russia, so Germany declared war on France, and they went through Belgium. Britain guaranteed Belgium, so Britain declared war on Germany, starting the First World War. At the start of the war, Russia performed remarkably well. They launched an offensive into Austrian Galicia and East Prussia, but they were soon kicked out by the German army and pushed all the way to Minsk. The front once again stabilized, but then Tsar Nicholas decided to become the field marshal, and Russia proceeded to lose even more ground. The Russian army was large but was poorly trained, poorly equipped, and undersupplied, and the Tsar was an incompetent leader. In 1917, this led to the October Revolution, in which Tsar Nicholas was forced to resign and a republic was declared. The republic wasn't one unified entity, it consisted of Democrats, Communists, Socialists, Anarchists, and Monarchists. This would eventually lead to the Russian Revolution, in which the Communists, under Vladimir Lenin, took over major cities like Petrograd, Moscow, and others. They would try a policy of no peace, no war with the Germans, in which they wouldn't fight, but there would be no peace. This went about as well as you can expect, and Russia was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, in which they would lose much of Eastern Europe and Finland. This would make the communists be seen as traitors, and the Russian Civil War would start, as everyone who hated the communists came together to be known as the White Army. The Russian Civil War would soon end in 1922, with the communists winning and establishing the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR for short. The USSR would soon industrialize under Stalin and, after World War II, become the second strongest country on the planet, being the leader of the communist bloc in the Cold War. But what if this never happened? Today we will discuss that question. But before starting the video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel, as it would help me create more alternate history scenarios just like this. But without any further ado, let's start the scenario. Now, our story begins during the Russian Civil War. In our timeline, Vladimir Lenin had many assassination attempts on him. Here, we will have one of them succeed, and Zinoviev will succeed him. Due to Trotsky's policy of no war, no peace, he would be discharged and never put in charge of the Red Army, resulting in the Bolsheviks' chance of winning the Civil War dropping even lower. From here, we would have greater cooperation between the White forces. Admiral Kolchak in Siberia would make a deal with Wrangel and Denikin in southern Russia. They would agree to temporarily cooperate against the Bolsheviks. This would result in more success for the White Army, while the independence movements in Eastern Europe would be more successful than they were in our timeline. In the post-Soviet War, no push towards Warsaw happens, and Poland secures an early peace than in our timeline. The Baltic states and Finland would still gain the same peace they did in our timeline, while in Ukraine, Makhno would be successful in the Ukrainian Civil War, leading to the establishment of an anarchist Ukraine. Belarus would be the last state to secure its independence, turning into a democratic republic. The death blow to the Bolsheviks would come when Wrangel and Denikin managed to take Moscow, while Kolchak and his army, aided by the famous Czechoslovak Legion, would march all the way from Siberia and manage to save Tsar Nicholas and his family. They would move west and, aided by some white forces in Karelia, manage to take Petrograd. The Russian Civil War would soon end. Russia would lose most of Eastern Europe, and while Wrangel and Denikin would be busy trying to establish some order in Russia, Kolchak would embark on a special military operation to restore Russian presence in the Caucasus. He would make a deal with the Allies, agreeing to aid them in the Turkish War of Independence, in exchange for territorial concessions and them recognizing Kolchak's authority over Russia. Kolchak would invade Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan and overwhelm them. In our timeline, Mustafa Kemal received most of his aid from the Bolsheviks, which was crucial for the Turks winning their War of Independence. Here, this aid would never reach. Kemal was still a tactical genius and would manage to hold off the Greeks and Russians for a while. But it would all be in vain, as the Turks would lose their war of independence. Greece annexes large parts of western Turkey, Russia annexes Pontus, and a Kurdish state is created to serve as a buffer between Britain and Russia. Turkey would be allowed to keep Constantinople, and the Ottomans would stay in power, essentially turning Turkey into a British puppet. After this victory in the Caucasus, Kolchak would be hailed as a hero, and his popularity in Russia would surge. Russia would be turned into a constitutional monarchy, all in name, with Tsar Nicholas's son being too young to rule, and the Duma being ineffective. Kolchak would become the regent and would rule Russia with an iron grip. A white scare will soon follow, with Kolchak cracking down on anyone who is a communist, reformist, and independence fighter, considering them all traitors to the motherland who abandoned Russia in its hour of need. Anti-Semitic and militaristic policies will soon follow, persecuting the Jewish population and giving the military, clergy, and the czarists more control. Land redistribution would not be as radical as it was in our timeline. While aid from Britain and France would help rebuild Russia, industrialization would be much slower than it was in our timeline. The Russian economy would soon experience an economic boom, with Russia having a growing capitalist class. But this would not last, as in 1929 the Great Depression would hit and the world economy would soon crash. Russia would be hit hard by this, and the Russian economy would go into deep recession. Prices of food and basic goods would skyrocket. The Russian people would blame Kolchak and his czarist government for this. In 1929, Tsar Alexei would be of age and would rule alongside the Duma and Kolchak. In 1931, the unrest would reach its peak, with people rioting the streets demanding the removal of Kolchak and branding him responsible for everything. Tsar Alexei, with the support of the army and the Duma, would lead a coup against Kolchak, ending his reign of terror and turning Russia into an actual constitutional monarchy rather than a dictatorship. In 1933, the Nazi Party under the funny mustache man would come to power in Germany. Their anti-Slavic and anti-Russian rhetoric, and the funny mustache man saying that the destiny of the German people is in the East, would bring the former Entente of Britain, France, and Russia back together. At the start, they would all try to appease Germany. During the Sudetenland crisis, Russia would take it as an opportunity to end Makhno and the anarchists in Ukraine. The anarchists here would be more isolated than the Soviets of our timeline, and the Russians would win. To be seen as reasonable, they wouldn't annex any territory, but turn Ukraine into a Russian puppet. It would become a constitutional monarchy with the Tsar of Russia becoming the Grand Prince of Ukraine, bringing Ukraine into the Russian sphere of influence. While Belarus, Poland, and the Baltic states, who would already be in a defensive alliance, would become wary of both Germany and Russia, but because of Britain and France, they would temporarily see Russia as an ally. When Germany demands Danzig from Poland and the Allies, they refuse. Germany declares war on Poland and is met with a combined Polish, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Latvian, Estonian, Lithuanian, and Russian army. Due to Russia not being as industrialized or competent as they were in our timeline, they wouldn't perform as well, but Germany also didn't have the time to massively build up their military, and things would turn into a stalemate in the east, while in the west, Russia would pressure Britain and France to launch an offensive, which they would do, forcing the Nazis to send half their army west. Soon they would start losing on all fronts, and the war ends with the Russian army and its allies marching to Berlin. The funny mustache man would shoot himself, with Nazis being removed from power soon after. The Allies would decide to partition Germany. France, Poland, and Russia would be most in the favor of this, while Russia agrees to support Poland in all of their claims against Germany if they let them take Belarus, which the Russians would turn into a puppet like Ukraine. Poland would gain parts of Pomerania, East Prussia, and all of Silesia, while France annexes the Saarland, and the rest of Germany is split up into 6 states. The Rhenish Republic, which would be under French influence, the Kingdom of Bavaria, which would see the Wittelsbach family return, the Kingdom of Prussia, where the Hohenzollerns would return, the Kingdom of Hanover, where a member of the House of Windsor, the British royal family, would be in charge, and the Kingdom of Baden-Württemberg and Saxony, both of which would see the members of the House of Romanov rule them, bringing them closer to Russia. The 50s would see the Anglo-Russian rivalry resuming, with the Cold War becoming the Great Game 2.0, as Britain and Russia start supporting rival factions all over the world. This great game in Europe would be limited to the east, where Russia would support Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Italy in their claims, while the British support Bulgaria, Albania, Romania, Poland, and later on Italy in the 60s, where after Mussolini's death, Italy comes back to being a constitutional monarchy, while in Asia, Britain would support Turkey, Afghanistan, and Iran in their claims against the Russians. They would also sponsor independence movements in the Caucasus and Central Asia, while Russia would support Kemalists and Republicans in Turkey and Iran, respectively. In the east, Russia would support Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China, while Britain would support Japan. In South Asia, India would gain its independence, but would happen later on, and Pakistan would be created out of fear that would fall to Russia's sphere of influence. India's independence would see them ceding Pashtun majority areas to Afghanistan, while Balochistan gets split between Afghanistan and Iran, and Britain would have India vow their neutrality in the Great Game. Finally, in the Middle East, the British would support Israel in the Arab-Israel Wars, which would see the Russians heavily supporting the Arabs and Nasser, as they did in our timeline. By the 70s, tensions would rock the Middle East as the pro-Western monarchies of Turkey and Iran are replaced with two new republics, partially under the Russian sphere of influence. Britain's worst fear has come true, and Russia now has free access into the Mediterranean through the Bosphorus. How will the scenario progress from here? Only time will tell. But this is where I'll end the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and leave your suggestions in the comment section down below. But for now, goodbye.